show as a whole before going around and talking a little bit about each piece in the show. If you have any questions, there will definitely be time for questions at the end, but there should also be opportunity in between talking about the paintings to ask a little question here and there. Just raise your hand. Just make sure you get my attention somehow. Anyway, so hopefully you've had a chance to take a look around at the show already. So the show, titled Paintings of Another Universe, showcases a body of work that I've been working on for 6 years now. And it's a series of paintings that follows an imaginary story of a small number of humans that suddenly find themselves in an alien world, which I have made up. And the story follows these humans as they learn and grow within this world and sort of find their place within it. And there's a couple different perspectives that I usually like to kind of frame this story from or within. The first being just the idea of entering a new world, or about the experience of finding oneself in a world that's different from what one might know or be used to. So I think that we all enter new worlds metaphorically at different points in our lives, whether that's in a sense that, even like maybe you've entered a new phase of your life and you're getting used to all the things that come with that, or maybe the world around you has changed and you're trying to adjust. For me, the main connection, or at least early on, the main connection that I would always think of was just that, recalls the fact that I was kind of nearing the end of art school around the time that these paintings were really starting to get going. And so just that prospect of entering the larger world for the first time was kind of what this idea of entering another world meant for me, and why I felt a connection with this story. You could say the story is maybe a bit of an exaggerated take on that sort of idea, but nonetheless it still made sense to me. But the other perspective that I like to sort of frame it from as well is that it's about the feeling of being an outsider after entering a new environment, or feeling when you enter a new environment or enter a new group, but you don't quite feel like you belong yet, and just going through that process of getting to that point where you do feel like you belong, which I think is something that everybody has experienced in some way as well. And I guess if I can speak for myself too, I think generally being an overall quieter person, and also specifically being an artist, has led to some feelings of being an outsider at different points along the way. So that, I'm sure, contributes to my perspective going into these as well. But I think there's lots of different reasons why someone might connect with that sort of idea. So the idea to work with this whole alien world narrative came about somewhat gradually. It all started with this painting that I made in my third year figurative painting class that pictured a few human figures serving food in a restaurant full of aliens wearing suits. And so one of the main things that you do in a figurative painting class is you paint from nude models that the teacher will have come in and model for you. And so this particular assignment, I had to put together some sort of scene, making use of the nude model poses that I had compiled over the course of the semester. And so I had this one pose that I liked, so I thought kind of looked like a guy holding up a big platter of food. So I thought, okay, how about a restaurant scene then? But then I also thought, considering that the poses that I was working from were all, people who were nude, I was like, well, having naked people serving food in a restaurant full of more people would be kind of weird and awkward. So naturally then, to resolve that, my thought process went to, well, what if the restaurant was full of aliens instead? Because maybe to them it wouldn't make much difference if the humans were nude. And in hindsight, that probably didn't make the painting any less weird overall, but that was my thinking going into it. And I was also kind of just getting bored with the more traditional stuff that I was doing with my art up to that point. So I wanted to do something more fun and decided to embrace doing something a little bit more out there. But the result was my first painting that involved humans and aliens together in some sort of scene together. And that painting isn't in the show because it isn't consistent with the rest of the body of work that ended up coming out of it. But it's relevant to mention just because that's where it kind of all got started. And I remember at the time being pretty surprised by what a positive reception that painting got from my peers and teachers. And so that kind of opened my mind up to the possibility that maybe this subject matter would be something that I would continue to work with. And so I did. And the more that as I continued to work with it and experimented putting these humans and aliens together in different situations, the world around them started to develop in these paintings as well. And the further along with it that I went, the more evident it became, I think, that there was something about the paintings that I felt a connection with too, or that resonated with me on some level. So that began the process of me sort of investigating the possible ways of interpreting and relating to these paintings, and really delving into what specifically I was connecting to in them. And so then I started kind of refining the look and the subject matter in the paintings, and began to think of each one as a part of a larger story. And so you'll see as we move through the show and take a look at the individual paintings, there is a progression in the narrative from the beginning where the humans are just kind of trying to navigate this world, and everything's kind of strange to the end where there's more of a sense of belonging and more of a level of comfort there. So with that, I think we're going to move into talking about some of the individual pieces in the show. And I'll try not to focus too much on any one individual one, just because there's quite a few to get through. So I don't want to take up too much time, but that's what the questions are for. If you have questions, and that's something that I don't get to. Maybe I'll stand over here then. People can, no, I guess, if you want, you can come closer, but. So this painting is the first one in the show. So it's called At the Procession for the New President Trio. And this one came about from me considering how the government might work in this made-up world. So obviously, since it's an alien world, I felt I needed to come up with something that was a little bit unusual. So then I thought, well, how about instead of one alien as the leader, there were three aliens that together occupied the position of the leader. And so hence you have President Trio, which is those three aliens right there. And you'll see as we move through the show too, for a lot of the paintings that I made earlier on, like including this one, so like 2018, 2019, my thinking going into it revolved a lot more around just wanting to build this world and explore what's in it. And then for the paintings that came after, like 2020 and onward, there was more of a conscious effort to contribute or build on the overall storyline in some way. But basically in this one, what's pictured is a parade of sorts for this newly elected President Trio as they ride into office on this big fancy boat-like vehicle. And I thought this was a good painting to start the show off with, just because this is one of the few paintings that kind of picture everybody in this world all together. You get to see the population of this world, you get to see all the aliens, and you also get to see some of the humans who are now there kind of dispersed throughout the crowd. And just about all the paintings that follow this one are focused on a smaller number of figures, sometimes even just one. So I liked the idea of starting with this one because it kind of helps to define the setting and the circumstances of this world and this narrative before going into some of the other ones. Anyway, that's about all I have to say about that one. So unless there's any questions, we'll move on to the second one. Okay. So here, this one's called Outside the City of Harennon, sitting on a water canopy. And this one's from a lot more recently. It's from just last year. And this one came about when I started thinking that I wanted to make a painting that focuses specifically on what emotions humans might be feeling in this new situation that they're in. And it also I'd also just happened to have a friend mention to me around this time that it would be interesting if we got to see a human sort of longing for the old world and how things used to be there, now that they're in this alien world. So the best concept I could come up with to represent this idea was just to picture a figure sitting alone and looking off into the distance at something far away. And having a setting sun as the focus in the distance also seemed fitting in the sense that it represented a fleeting moment of something that this person would find familiar, even if it isn't necessarily the same sun as the one they're used to seeing. And I was a little hesitant to go with the idea at first, just because of how often sunsets are used in art. I didn't want the painting to seem kind of cheesy or cliche, but in the end I think it worked the way that I hoped it would. And so the second part of the title mentions the sitting on a water canopy. So water canopy that the girl is sitting on in the picture was initially imagined as a sort of, I guess, natural cave-like tunnel structure, except with openings all throughout the top and sides, just to make it interesting. But as the process went on, I began to think of them as being more canopy-like, just because of how they ended up turning out in the painting. So I made that change. And this is also the biggest painting in the show, and the one that took the longest amount of time to make. So it gets to have that distinction.
Yeah.
And so if everybody's good, we'll move along to the next one. So here we have learning how to play Baltobian toss. This is title. So the idea is basically that these humans are being taught by a few of the aliens how to participate in a game of theirs where everybody has to balance on top of these plant stalks and toss these objects around without falling off. And I like to think that there's probably more to the game as well beyond just what you can see in the picture, but I never went as far as to define all of the rules. So leave that up to the imagination of the viewer. But this painting was one instance where an idea kind of came out of a rough design and not the other way around. So for a lot of paintings, I'll go into it with, we'll start off with me having an idea for a painting and then coming up with rough drawings or designs based on that idea. But in the case of this one, I actually had the rough drawing of the design for these plants first, and that's what kind of led me to imagine this composition with a number of figures standing on top of them in a circle. And that developed into what ended up being this game and this painting. Okay.
What do they fall on? What happens if they fall?
So there's just water on the ground.
It's just water?
It's just water, yeah. I'll talk about that a little more when I talk about this one too. Yeah, so we'll just go splash. It'll be they're fine.
They're fine.
Yeah, no.
Some goo.
And am I standing? If I stand here, am I in the way? Okay. Thinking I might not have quite as much to say about this. So what's pictured here in this one is a neighborhood of floating houses within this forest of tall plants stretching upwards from below the water's surface. And the narrative aspect of this one is pretty straightforward. As you can see, really pretty small in the lower left-hand quarter of the painting here, there's a human swimming up to one of the houses and being greeted by an alien friend. So just about going to visit a new friend. And that alien's name is Mayvoi. So the title of the painting is Visiting Mayvoi. And now I guess I'll address the water that's covering the ground in all these paintings. So pretty early on when I was starting to build this world, I was trying to think of ways to make it seem different. And one of the things I decided to try was, in one painting in particular actually, was to just have the ground be completely covered in shallow water. And I liked the way that it worked in that painting because I just liked the way that it made it seem unusual. And I also thought it worked really well visually just because of all the reflections it creates at the bottom of the painting. So then I decided I'll just make that constant throughout this whole world. There'll just be water everywhere.
Nice, yeah.
Yeah. most of it's shallow enough to walk through, so you'll see figures standing with just their ankles submerged, like in a lot of the other paintings. But there are a couple where it's deeper, like this one, where you can only see the head popping out there. And also in the next one that we're going to, which is the one in the middle over there.
All right.
Okay. So this painting's unique in that it's the only one that gives us a look below the surface of the water. And so we can see there's a little underwater city there with some underwater aliens swimming around whose arms are kind of more like fish fins. And up at the top corner, you can also see a human and an alien from the world above just sort of swimming up close to the surface, looking on as they pass by. And the idea for this one came about when I started thinking I wanted to create portion of this world that humans in the story would have the ability to admire, but couldn't actually live in or participate in very easily. So that led to the idea of having part of this world exist underwater, where a human couldn't naturally survive for very long. And so the aliens that live in this underwater city are a lot like the aliens that live in the world above the water, except these aliens have the ability to survive and thrive underwater. So a human and an alien from the world above can look on and imagine what life might be like for those who can live in this part of the alien world, but they know that they themselves could never survive that far below the surface of the water. And I guess just a little fun thing to point out too, you have the same tall plants as in the last painting, only this time you can see them from below the surface of the water. So it's a continuity between paintings. And yeah, so if that's, unless there are any questions, we'll move to the other side of the gallery.
Avery, the little things above your flying aliens are housing? Like
The
these
little things
blobby
above?
things? Yeah.
These?
Yeah.
Yes, those are buildings.
So it's like where they all can kind of live.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. A lot of the buildings in this world have like the geometric look,
Yes.
I guess. So I was kind of staying consistent with that look, but also, I guess, adapting it a little bit to be a little different for the underwater part of the world.
Shelter of some kind.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, cool. All right, let's move over here. So we'll continue on with this painting. This one's probably the most overtly humorous one in the show. It's called Allergic to Alien Food. So I have this drawing in my sketchbook of this alien dinner party with this big dish of food in the middle of the table. I figured I would end up using per painting. But I also figured there would probably be at least one human here at the dinner party, and maybe this would be like the first exposure to whatever kind of food was being served here. But when I thought about it, I felt like that idea on its own wasn't really adding enough to the story, considering like the work that I'd already done. So then I came up with the idea that maybe the human would try the food, but it wouldn't sit very well with them. They'd have to leave the party because of they were having an allergic reaction to the food. And I liked the idea because on the one hand, you know, it sort of highlights a way in which maybe a human might have trouble fitting into this world. But on the other hand, I also happen to be someone who has multiple food allergies myself, so I found it to be quite relatable. And so you can see there's on the table there's the food that they tried that's still sitting there, and then yeah, in the background, not feeling very well. Okay, now shifting over one. Another one of the smaller paintings in the show that also has one of the longest names, called Turned Down by One Shuttle Boat Waiting for the Next One. And I can explain further on that. Maybe I'll stand over here. So you remember a couple paintings ago I mentioned how there's just water everywhere in this world. So given this, I decided the main vehicle or the main mode of transportation then in this world would less be boats. And so thus shuttle boats, I decided, would kind of be like the main mode of public transportation in this case. And so this blue structure is like the equivalent of a small station or a bus shelter. And the three humans who are standing there waiting for the next shuttle boat to arrive after the previous one wouldn't let them get on. I didn't define what the exact reason was, but I just tend to think the boat was full. And I think of this painting as being about like having to wait for your opportunity to come to kind of help you get to where you want to go in the world or in life. You know, oftentimes the process, I guess I'm thinking of it kind of like in terms of like a job or a career opportunities. Like oftentimes the process involves being turned down one or more times before finding the opportunity that sticks. And until you find that opportunity, it kind of can leave you feeling a little stuck on the outside, I guess. So that was the idea behind the storyline of that painting and the title of it. Yeah. Okay. Spinning around. So here we have learning how to read alien text. And so you have this guy in his own alien world living space trying to teach himself how to read the written text that the aliens in this world use. And the text is what's being projected sort of holographically from this alternate computer that he has in front of him. And this painting started with the idea of getting to see a human have their own sort of sanctuary within this world where one could escape to temporarily and kind of be surrounded by things that are familiar to them. I think that we all have a place like this that we go to, whether to find comfort or to recharge. And these places become more important when faced with a lot of change or unfamiliarity in our lives. And so that's why we see a human there with kind of all the familiar earth objects around them. And my initial idea for the painting was to just have this person be engaging in some sort of comforting solitary activity. But when I was contemplating what specific activity that should be, I instead ended up coming up with the idea that they would be, well, trying to teach themselves how to read the language and I felt that was a more effective thing to picture just because that would be a necessary skill to learn for both growth and survival in this world. And it would also be a realistic challenge that a human in this situation would have to face. So that kind of adds more to the story. So you can see, like I mentioned, the computer that's in front of him. He's also got some of his notes scattered around the room, each with kind of, I guess, one alien word written out on them and an image above it to help connect to the meaning of that word, help him study a little bit. And there's even a couple of notes where it's just a question mark above the word, just to show that he hasn't figured it all out yet. Yeah. Unless there are any questions. Oh, yeah.
So with this one, what made you choose just one color, like different hues of the same color?
What did make me choose that? I did do it one other time. So previous to this one, I had made the one that you see on the middle wall there, which is kind of similar in that it's an interior space that's, it's completely one color. I think just having it be all in one color kind of maybe gave it a little bit more of a moodiness or I guess puts more emphasis maybe on the feeling of the atmosphere of it. That's a good question.
I just thought maybe you had something.
Sometimes just having like that strong color. I mean, a lot of the times when I choose the colors, it all falls under just trying to make it seem like it's from another world. So a lot of the time I think that was probably a lot of why I chose this color too. Just having it shine in at such a strong, I don't know, like you'd never see a world like Earth.
Almost like the window light is tinting it.
Yeah, that's how I
Okay.
thought of it. Yeah, it was mostly to cast it as from another world, I guess. Yeah, and I hadn't used this color yet. I wanted to experiment using this color. Yeah. Okay, so that's good. So we'll move on. Okay, the title of this one is A Long Distance from Somewhere, and that's basically just a fancier way of saying that this person in the picture is lost. So I had the idea in the back of my mind to do a painting like this for a while, with just kind of a singular figure lost in some sort of endless seeming environment. But I knew that for the painting to be worth making, it couldn't just be some sort of vast emptiness that they were lost in. It needed to be something that was going to be visually captivating. And so this one night I had the idea to just draw out an environment made up entirely of shapes and forms reminiscent of moose antlers. And I can't remember how exactly my thought process, or my train of thought led me to that, but I just remember when I thought of it, I thought, this has a good chance of working out well. And so that night I made 2 drawings that pretty much almost the exact same compositionally as what ended up being this painting and the next painting. So that's the background story on where the look of this environment came from. I'm not even sure if the forms that make up this environment are better kind of considered as some kind of crazy landforms or some kind of strange large plants. I think maybe initially I was thinking of them as landforms before deciding that maybe they made more logical sense as plants. But that's also kind of what I like about it too, is that there's that ambiguity there, and it can change based on maybe how you want to see it. But in terms of the narrative aspect, I think of this painting and the next painting as being 2 different variations of the same storyline. So in both you can see they have, the person in the foreground who's lost, but in the first one, this person is completely on their own, whereas in the second one, you can see they found a few other humans in the distance who are also lost. So now they can at least be lost together. And that kind of recalls just the idea that if you're struggling with something, it can be easy to feel like you're alone, but it's helpful when you realize that there are others out there who are just like you, and you don't have to be alone, I guess. Right. Okay, we'll move to the final third of the show, final 5 paintings here. And this one is a fan favorite. So this one pictures a human teaching a couple of the aliens how to play the guitar. And so anyone who knows me knows that I tend to enjoy myself some good guitar playing. So as a result, the guitar tends to find its way into my art from every so often. And so while I was brainstorming new scenarios to act as the basis of new paintings, I ended up thinking it'd be funny if a couple of the aliens saw one of the humans playing the guitar and wanted to know how to play it themselves. And I liked the idea because while most of the other paintings, in the series show the humans learning and growing in this alien world, this was one instance where that gets flipped around, and a human has the chance to offer something of their own to the aliens. And I think of this painting as kind of being the first in what I consider to be the final section of the show, where we start to see the humans have more of a comfort level and gain a bit more of a sense of belonging. So anytime you're in a new environment, it can be easy to feel like, maybe you don't know anything or you don't have anything to offer, but I like to think that this painting recalls the moment when you realize that you do have something worthwhile or unique to give to the world, even if it's just small, and the sense of belonging that comes with that.
Awesome.
Okay.
Do you need some water?
Yeah, I'm starting to get a little dry, but that's a bit better. Okay, so here, the title of this painting is Cross Country Boat Race. So you can see at the bottom of the painting, there's the little boats speeding along. And I was mainly thinking of boat racing here as like the equivalent of car racing or automobile racing. So I just had fun designing the boats to have kind of a roof and a tail fin spoiler part at the back to try to make them look a little bit sportier. But I also admit that they kind of look like, the design kind of makes them look like glowing fish speeding along too, but I still like them nonetheless. And the narrative continues in, well, just that you can see a couple of humans, those two, and a couple of aliens, they're all competing in a race. And this sort of continues with the idea from the last painting of just that the humans have sort of become more established in this world. They're now on the level of being competitive boat racers. And the, I guess as far as the environment in the painting, that was mostly born out of some leftover drawings that I had from the underwater painting on the other side of the gallery. There were some different ideas that I had for what the rocks might look like in that environment that I didn't end up using, but I liked enough to where I figured I would use them again in a different painting. So those turned into this composition, this drawing of a natural setting with these big rocky boulder-like forms as the main point of attention. And when I was considering the possibility that these rock forms might be made up of multiple different colored sections, I instead came up with the idea to have sections of them glow in the dark and to have those glowing sections work as the main sources of light in a nighttime setting. So that's the story behind, I guess, the design for this painting. I've had lots of people come to me and tell me that they interpreted these forms as being buildings, which I can definitely see as well, because I can see, you know, the lit up parts maybe are just like windows, which is cool too. But that's just, yeah, just explaining where the thought process behind where they came from. And yeah, okay, spinning around. We're at the final three paintings now. This one's called Night Out, and it pictures a rooftop restaurant scene with a couple humans and many aliens getting ready to eat together, and also in the left-hand part of the painting there's a band playing. And I think going into this painting, my main motivation was just kind of wanting to explore what the city might look like in this world. And keep in mind, this is the second oldest painting in the show. So the only one that existed going into this one already that you see is the guitar lesson one. So I hadn't yet pictured any of the cityscape. So I figured this was a good opportunity to kind of show my humans and aliens together in a social setting. And so doing this in the form of a rooftop dining scene allowed me to picture the humans and aliens participating in a gathering together while also getting to show some of the city's architecture in the way that I had envisioned. And if there's no questions there, turn my focus here to the smallest painting in the show, and it's pretty straightforward. It's called Together in a Patch of Kobkin Plants, and it pictures a couple people hugging, holding each other, and it's just about having that person in your life with whom you share, I guess, a natural understanding or connection that goes beyond what either of you have with most other people. So, a pretty lovey painting, if you ask me. And the Kobkin plants, as referred to in the title, are those big floating things that kind of look like either giant strawberries or pineapples. The design for those was actually came from this cabbage that I had, where a whole bunch of the leaves had been torn off of it already. So all that was left was just this smaller ball of leaves with like a sort of a thick stem sticking out with all the little bits where all the other leaves had been torn off. So that's where the top part of the plant came from. Those were all the little bits where the cabbage leaves had been torn off. And yeah, that's the background on the Kobkin plants. They show up in a couple other paintings too. There's a couple in this one as well. And the last and final painting in the show, the happy ending of sorts, is this one. It's called The Beginning of Home. It pictures a young couple moving into their first alien world apartment. And it's kind of just meant to signal, I guess the full coming of age for the humans in this world now that they're kind of more established and have acclimated to this world to the point where they can now call it home. So yeah, you can see they've got their moving boxes sort of scattered around their fancy looking 2-story apartment. When I say that it's 2 stories, it makes it sound like it's huge. But in my mind, I don't think there's actually that much more to it than what you see in the picture. Maybe there's, an upstairs room, downstairs room. Maybe there's a small room attached that we can't see, like a bathroom or something. But not much more to it than that. So at least in my head. So not super big, just different. And
No rails.
no what?
No rails.
No, yeah. Nope. That would take up too much space.
For young people.
Any apartments have stairs, or do you have to like climb up to the second?
I think I kind of pictured maybe that there would be stairs coming down from this part, like, but you just can't see them from the angle that we're looking at it from. So there might be stairs attached to this edge. So like if you were to walk down, there would be stairs, but you can't see them in any case. So maybe there's stairs, maybe there's not stairs. But maybe they have to jump on the table here.
Imagination. Amazing.
Well, yeah, that's the whole show. Thank you all for listening.